Hello, everyone. Welcome to the KPI Practitioner Pod, where I get the chance to speak with some of the best coaches, consultants, and thought leaders that use the Key Polarity Indicator, a self and 360 sense-making tool to help people, leaders, organizations make sense of the polarized world we live in today. Today, I'm joined by Sharon Blackborow. Sharon is currently working as the Vice President of Learning, Talent, and Organization Effectiveness for the Inova Health System. She's a dynamic leader, an Organizational Development Maestro, a Spirited Facilitator, and a Ferocious Learner. Sharon, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Cole. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
Good. It's fun to hear my LinkedIn titles said back to me.
I told you.
It still
I
fits.
saw it and I had to. I saw it and I had to. I couldn't help myself. So Sharon, why don't we just kick it off by, telling me about, your work in the world right now?
Yeah. So the way I like to think about what I do is I always tell people I get to work on the soul of an organization.
Mm.
So I started my career in this space sort of accidentally and sort of fell in love with it from then. So I spend my time on three key areas, and I think about them as like the three levels of the system that I work on. So I work with leaders around their leadership development. I work with teams on their team effectiveness, and then I work on the organization's culture. So I really get to play in all the fun spaces.
I love that. And I love the idea of the soul too, because all of those things after you list them out, it's like really is to me, like that's the core right there. I mean, that's what makes the system cohesive and as efficient and supportive as possible for people.
Yeah.
Truly. So Sharon, how did you hear about the KPI? Why did you want to get certified in the tool in the first place? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I had the great pleasure to watch it be birthed in the room. So I was part of the first cohort around polarities and paradox management at Georgetown. And I remember watching Kelly and Brian sort of deconstruct what would be the KPI as a teaching tool for that certification. And I said to Brian, like, I feel like I just watched the Myers-Briggs type indicator get born. Like it was palpable immediately. Everyone in the room was like, what is this thing? How do I get my hands on it? And how do I deploy it to my clients? So it was really magical. So of course I followed it all the way through certification.
I love that you mentioned the birthplace of the Myers-Briggs. That's fantastic. I would love to know, like, obviously the Myers-Briggs is a huge assessment. It's known everywhere, used everywhere. Is there anything about the KPI that you think, what do you think is, in your own words, not that it's not it's like a polarity, not better or worse, but what makes it a little bit different than something like the Myers-Briggs?
Yeah, I'm a certification junkie, so I could probably talk about this across all kinds of things. But what I really love about the KPI, and one of the reasons why I just sort of built it into my own coaching practice and my practice as a learning leader in the organizations that I've led, is it doesn't have an opinion. And I think it's so rare to find a tool that sort of accepts there are many ways in to greatness, and there are many versions of what doing well looks like. It's very individual, and so that's the piece that I really like about this tool. The other thing is it just invites curiosity and questions because it doesn't have an opinion necessarily. I always look at the red, yellow, green as just sort of places to get curious about, and that's the way I talk about it with my clients. It really invites question and curiosity. So when you think about building learning programs that are really about adult development and helping people stay object and stay curious and really like live into this both, and having a tool that helps it start that way is really, really important. I've had other iterations before the KPI was alive and well, where we would have other sort of 360 tools built into programs that were about adult development. And it always felt sort of odd that you're having this heavy assessment happening to you, and then you're being asked to expand, and then a heavy assessment on the other end, instead of a tool that helps you find the places to get curious about, work on, and see if you've sort of are able to harness something differently on the other side. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I love what you said about the programs too, because oftentimes, as you know, a lot of those learning and development programs are, it's months of your time dedicated. And so if you're dealing with an assessment that is, you're getting an absurd amount of feedback, and then they're asking you to make a transformation into something, it can be, it may shut you down before you even get into like some of the learning and development. Whereas the KPI, it's like, here's this very digestible report of information that's not showing you you're this or that. It's showing you how you show up and behave in between two things,
Exactly.
which can be pretty powerful. I'd be curious to know a little bit more about how it's impacted your work. And if you've seen, some people when they're on here will share like a client story, or maybe something even for themselves too. That's kind of the important thing too that I like to ask about, because oftentimes people that are in our practitioner community talk about, the impact it has for their clients, but also the way it's been able to impact their work as a coach, consultant, thought leader, anything like that. And now I'm like forgetting the question I even asked to start. I was just giving you examples, but just some of the ways you've seen it really make an impact on your work.
Yeah, I think I'll share a personal story first, and then I can share sort of how it helps my clients. So when I was in the certification, learning about polarities and paradox, I was simultaneously in some of the deepest suffering in my work as well. So I had really poured my own identity into a major project that went completely south while I was in that room learning. And so it was this really, sort of like divine intervention of a container to sort of process what was happening to me. And when I say like in suffering, I truly thought I was going to have to go to the hospital. I was so sick. Because I didn't have a way to sort of make object what was happening. And I also didn't really have a framework to understand, how did I go so wrong, right? Or how did we go so wrong? And so being able to use the polarity framework and seeing how my sort of deep preferences made our program be sort of over focused on flexibility when I was working in an organization that really needed both flexibility and structure, that it was so easy to use a tool to help me see how we got here. It was like, oh, of course we got here, and here's the way forward. Without having the navigator to make sense of that, I really don't know how I would have recovered. What my leader at the time said is like, you're like a phoenix from the ashes. You like immediately, when I tell you this program burned to the ground, it was the biggest disaster of my career. And to have a tool that helped me quickly make sense of what happened, quickly have direction of like where to bring it back to, get the energy system sort of back to center, and myself too, right? Understand sort of what happened for myself was invaluable. So I think being a practitioner who used this framework and this tool to make sense of something very real, very business, right? This was not like a academic exercise, something that I was really living through, makes me very confident that it's a tool that I feel like my clients, I feel like everybody needs. So I really don't get into the discussion of whether or not the KPI or navigating polarities is a helpful tool. It's just when, right? That's how I think about it. It's like, when is my client ready to hear it?
Absolutely. And I'm curious now, because I'm thinking, I heard you use the word map that. And one of the things I haven't really talked about on here, and for those that aren't familiar, is the Polarity Navigator tool, which is essentially, a map where you're able to take each of the poles of the polarity and really map, the benefits above them, the overuses below them. And you make a little bit of space to really integrate and see how that fits for you, or how you envision yourself really maximizing the benefits. Did you take the KPI and then map on the navigator in that situation? Or did you use the navigator and was that where the light bulb went off? And then you were like, you took the KPI later on and you were like, oh, well, now I see it across the board.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Because remember, as I was experiencing what is now the KPI, it was a learning tool, right?
Yeah.
So I was learning it through the navigator. Since then, having taken the KPI, I mean, I always say responsibility and forgiveness will be on my tombstone, right? Like this is the polarity I will map for the rest of my life, likely, or navigate for the rest of my life. That construct of the other side of responsibility is forgiveness. I cannot tell you how groundbreaking that is for most people. So that is a gift that has only come through the KPI. So to give people language when you're so sort of tied to one pole, we know this, right? You need a tool that helps you see even what's on the other side. And so having these tools that help an individual see that, a leader see that, and an organization see that is really, really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said about the realization that the other side was forgiveness. The last episode I recorded with Pablo Bernal from the Vatican, he talks about, and he is fluent in multiple languages. And one of the things he talked about is like how gentle and digestible like the language used in the KPI is, and how that's able, to really move across languages, multilingual people. And so I love that use. And I think when I think about the polarity on my tombstone, I can't help but think about for me, it's got to be take seriously, hold lightly. I feel like everyone has one, and I've never used it. I've never heard it described in that way. I just can't help but laugh a little bit because that has got to be like every person has one. I feel like because a lot of them, I feel like for me at least, like my one stems from a deep level of identity that I didn't really realize I had until I learned about the tool. I always thought I was very type A. My preference is for take seriously. And so I always thought I was just a very type A, high strung, high maintenance guy. And I thought that kind of stemmed from, an athletic background where it was a lot of discipline. Like if you're not here 15 minutes early, you're late. Like if you're not in the weight room 30 minutes early, like you're forgotten. Like timeliness, cleanliness, discipline. And I always thought that was just like my personality when really it's so much deeper than that. And when I started to realize that I used to always think if you weren't taking things seriously, you were lazy, lackadaisical, you didn't care. And so when I was talking about it with Brian, I was like, what even is hold lightly? What does that even mean? I was like, where'd you come up with this?
Yeah. So this goes back to what I was saying around like, what a beautifully judgment-free tool to just say like, of course you would think these things about hold lightly because this is your preference. Like that is the thing that I actually think the KPI is actually holds that polarity very well, that like take seriously, hold lightly, because what's in it is quite deep and serious, but it comes to you in such a place of like, of course, and here's what maybe we could do, so, and I think that is a really different way into data than other assessments.
Absolutely. So I guess my last question, and this is typically the last thing I ask people, is after all this conversation we've had, this has been fantastic. Is there anything else you want people or you'd want people to know about, whether it's the KPI as a tool, KPI certification, KPI personally, anything that you'd want people to know that we couldn't end this call without you?
Well, two things come to mind, and they're from really two different avenues. So this might even be like my brain sort of ping-ponging of both ends. One is very relational, one is very business. So on the relational side, I have to share that my learning circle from the KPI certification is still together. I think we're 3 years in or 2 years, something like that. So the work of learning this tool, I think, is so meaningful that you bond with the people you learn with. And that,
Mhm.
if you think about it from a networking perspective, just from, I mean, gosh, that happened pre-pandemic. So to be with people who are like-minded and have this common language and are sort of doing the same work as you in the world was and continues to be one of the biggest blessings of my life. So there's that. So at that, I would say like that alone is the reason to get certified in this. On the business side, you know, I feel like for coaches, and I always say this to people that I'm interacting with sort of early in their coaching journey, is like, this is a strategic differentiator. Like you said, right? A million people know about MBTI, a million people actually have a perspective about how good or not good that tool is, right? All those things. This is something that can really give a coach a strategic edge of something that not a lot of people yet have, right?
Yeah.
So, from that perspective, I think it's really smart for people to get on the bandwagon early.
Yeah. I obviously I love to hear you say that. But more importantly, back to the point of the relational side, like it's so funny to hear you say that because I think back to episode 1 with Mel Amthor. And when I introduced her, I was like proud to throw in that she was like the learning pod. She was like
Yeah,
my one-to-one connection through the certification process. I was like,
yeah,
that's my I was like, that is my like that is like I'm proud of that. So that's awesome. That's so great, Sharon.
yeah,
Thank you so much.
yeah.
All righty. Well, I think with that I mean, what better way to end on there? Yeah, I so appreciative of this conversation today. So appreciative of you as a colleague and a practitioner, and all of the other good things about you that I am not listing right now. Um, and I thank you so much for your time today, your continued support, and everything we do. It's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help any way I can. I love this space maybe more than you all do. So I'm happy to help the cause any way I can.
That's fantastic. I can't wait till Kelly or Brian watches this. That's awesome. Oh, all righty, Sharon. Well, thank you so much. And I will talk to you soon. And yeah, thanks again.